90% of North Sea oil and gas are in Scottish territorial waters.
In the end, what international law says is this is a matter for agreement between the states.
Scotland has an ambition to get to 100% of the energy it uses coming from renewable sources.
Production of oil and gas in this country brings tremendous benefits to the economy here. We support over 150,000 jobs across the country. We supply oil and gas, which is vital to the country's energy security of supply, and we also generate substantial revenues for the Treasury.
Clearly there are a number of policy choices available to the people of Scotland, how we can benefit by oil and gas. I'm pretty clear that we've not benefited by it thus far. Indeed, North Sea oil and gas has been used by successive UK governments, first under the Thatcher government, to essentially fund the undermining of Scottish industry. Scotland must be the only country in the world to pay for its own economic decline, so we've not benefited thus far. About 90% of North Sea oil and gas are in Scottish territorial waters, so it seems sensible to me that 90% of North Sea oil and gas will be in the hands of an independent Scottish state.
The Scottish Government seems fairly clear that one or other of the current administrative boundaries would be used, and that may well be what turns out to be the case. Where I think there's a bit of an uncertainty is that there's no absolute requirement that one of those existing boundaries would be used. In the end, what international law says is this is a matter for agreement between the states. Could one rule out the possibility that the remaining UK might make a slightly more ambitious claim? What might that lead to? And one of the added complications here, of course, is this would be part of a much larger conversation about a division of assets and liabilities. So it's quite difficult to give a definitive answer.
If Scotland was to become independent, then it's only reasonable to expect that the assets would be divided on a geographical basis. And I think both sides would have to accept that. But what we have to remember is that the costs associated with taking on up to 90% of the responsibility for oil and gas would then fall on an Edinburgh government. And at a time when decommissioning is likely to be the single biggest expense faced in the North Sea, that is a very big expense for us to accept.
We are a mature basin, which means that all the big and relatively simple fields have been identified. So what is left are fields which are increasingly small in size, perhaps more challenging to develop.
We've been told consistently that we're past the peak of oil production, that we're past the peak of the value of oil, that oil is going to run out imminently. What we actually know is that there's about 40 to 50 years left of production in those fields that are currently producing. In terms of green energy, Scotland has an even brighter future in that sector than I think it does even in terms of its substantial oil and gas deposits. We have some 25% of Europe's offshore wind and tidal generating capacity, 25%. So we actually are well placed to be a leader in green renewable technology.
We opened the first part of Whiteley Wind Farm about 3 or 4 years ago now. It's the largest onshore wind farm in the United Kingdom. It generates enough power and electricity to power most of Glasgow. Scotland has an ambition to get to 100% of the energy it uses coming from renewable sources. It's important to remember what that actually means. It doesn't mean our only source of energy is renewables, but 100% of what we use will come from renewables, and the additional energy we produce we can then export to other countries.
Clearly, a lot of the Scottish Government's plans for renewables would depend on our ability to sell the excess of the power generated outside of Scotland, because we would have an excess well beyond our own domestic requirements. That then raises a number of questions, because although it looks as if we have a ready market south of the border, we would then perhaps find ourselves competing with other renewable generators in other parts of Europe. And there's no necessary guarantee that renewables generated in Scotland would actually be cheaper and therefore competitive with these other generators. There are no easy answers here. Does that mean that Scotland should abandon its renewable plans? I clearly don't think that's the case, but I think it's important to be aware of the uncertainties.